Good afternoon. Today is Wednesday, the 15th of October, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Diane Rasmussen with me in the UK Column studio in Plymouth. So welcome to you, Diane.
Thanks.
We'll be joined by Vanessa Beeley by live link. And we've got a very busy and I think quite an interesting UK column news today because there's an overwhelmingly female theme to it. Of course, the series Gutsy Women is one of the series for UK column news. Both you, Diane, and Vanessa feature on Gutsy Women. But we've got a number of guests with us today, also women. So this is really interesting. Now, Vanessa, you're going to kick off with an update on, well, the so-called peace deal in Gaza. But the more I read, the more personally I become disgusted with how this is being presented. And it seems to be biased purely in favour of what is good for Israel. But that's my personal take on it. As I've said, we're going to be having a look at Gutsy Ladies and in particular the power of activism to fight back against the pernicious policies that are unfolding in the UK. Vanessa's also got a section having a look at, beg your pardon, Diane, let's bring you in first because you were talking about what's happening with education libraries again, and in particular the grooming of the minds of children. And you've got a guest, Kathy Mudge, who's going to hopefully join us to be talking about the activist side as well. Vanessa's going to be taking a look at Syria and terrible things to do with children and trafficking. We're going to end by having another look at activism in a rather different and rather poignant form. We've got a very good extra today. If you're a UK column member, you can join us. So first of all, Vanessa, welcome. And what are you seeing in Gaza?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not a peace deal. I agree with you there, Brian. It's at best another ceasefire agreement that's already been violated by Israel. At worst, of course, it's a peace trap set by President Trump and his cohorts of ludicrous world leaders that met with him in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. So let's first of all look at a couple of videos from that meeting. First of all, Trump making ludicrous claims about humanitarian aid rolling into Gaza. So let's roll this.
War in Gaza is over. Humanitarian aid is now pouring in, including hundreds of truckloads of food, medical equipment, and other supplies, much of it paid for by people in this room. Civilians are returning to their homes.
So according to Trump, aid is rolling in. We'll come on to that in a second. But I did just want to show Starmer in all his glory. He was basically hidden behind a plant at the back of the group for most of the meeting. And when Trump was speaking, he strategically placed himself directly behind Trump, I think, in the hope that he would be allowed to speak. And Trump at some point calls him out. And let's see what actually happens.
United Kingdom. Where's United Kingdom? Where's our friend? Where? Come here. Is everything going good?
Very good.
That's very nice of you here. These people all came in like 20-minute notice, and I think it's fantastic. And we have so many others, and just so many others.
Starmer really firmly put in his place there, obviously expecting to speak and not given the microphone. But let's move on to more serious matters. So as I said, Israel is already cutting back on the amount of aid that is being allowed into Gaza. Rafah crossing with Egypt is still shut. The number of trucks being allowed to enter is about 50% of those that were promised, so 300 rather than 600. And of course, remembering that there were thousands of trucks coming in on a daily basis when Gaza was still standing prior to October the 7th. And effectively, the claim by Israel is that Hamas has not yet handed over the bodies of the hostages that were killed in the Zionist bombing of Gaza. Hamas has, in effect, handed over some of the bodies, but are still searching for them. Of course, the bombardment since October the 7th destroyed the equipment that Hamas needs to actually move the rubble and identify and find the bodies to hand over to Israel. And that's also been confirmed by the Red Cross, that is also saying this kind of procedure is going to take weeks, not hours or days. Then on October the 14th, Israel violated the ceasefire with deadly attacks on Palestinians, killing 9 people in Gaza that, according to the Israeli claims, went too close to the new yellow line, which the Israeli forces have withdrawn to. So they were killed both by quadcopters, artillery fire and sniper fire. And then basically, as they were leaving, the Zionist forces burned much of the properties that they had occupied in Gaza. This is a report in Al-Hahad English. They torched Gaza homes, but not only the homes, they torched also the sewage treatment station, and humanitarian aid that was waiting to come into Gaza was burned, according to multiple reports. Then also we mentioned in last week's news that there was potential for the ISIS factions, or the extremist factions, that had been given weapons and were being funded by Israel to turn against Hamas and the resistance factions in Gaza, also being weaponized once the Zionist forces had withdrawn. And in fact, they have been conducting a series of assassinations. This is Gaza's Palestinian journalist Salah al-Jafari, killed by collaborators, as it says here, but working with Israel. So he survived 735 days of bombing attempts on his life, and the genocide only to be killed by the collaborators with Israel that Hamas is now trying to root out. And yes, they have executed members of that group. The prisoners that are being released, I think it's upwards of 2,000 prisoners that have been released by the Zionists. Of course, there's thousands more still in the Israeli jails. This is just one video, some very moving videos that shows the extent of physical and emotional torture that these prisoners have gone through. Some of them have been held for months. Some of them have been held for years. This is just one clip of a busload of prisoners arriving back in Gaza. So if we can just play this. And the next image is of, I didn't play the video because it is quite harrowing. This is Dr. Mohammed Asalia, so a doctor that was taken from the Al-Shifa hospital, is now returned to the Al-Shifa hospital with severe heart pain and seizure after his time in the Zionist prisons. Let's hope that he can be helped to recover. And then finally, I just want to play part of an interview with Professor Haim Brashith, who's an associate research fellow at SOAS in the UK. And he's talking about basically what I've said many times, that any ceasefire that is agreed upon by Israel and the Zionist bloc, including, of course, President Trump, is effectively a way for the Israelis to recover from the conflict that they're currently involved in this case in Gaza, to pivot towards another. Let's hear what he says. He does agree with me.
The United States is doing. The United States is ceding military bases everywhere. The Chinese are actually building. The Americans are destroying. So that's the difference between the two systems now fighting for control. And Israel is exactly where it belongs because they specialize in destruction. So I think the implications of a war against Iran might be very far-reaching if the Israelis get their way. First of all, if the war happens, which is almost certain, and secondly, if they get the upper hand, then the destruction is going to advance in Eastern Central Asia at a pace which we haven't seen yet. So this is the desperation of the West, which is spreading to military actions everywhere to stop what is a trading nation supremacy of China. And the Americans.
So effectively, this ceasefire, I won't call it a peace deal, is, in my opinion, the start of something much bigger.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that. I would say the start of something else, which is going to be much worse as it unfolds, but terrible times. And I know that reporting what you are seeing and hearing there in the Middle East makes a real impact on you. So thank you for bringing that to us. We'll be able to discuss a little bit more in UK Column Extra after the news. What's happening with children, and I think including trafficking of children?
Looks very much like it. I mean, basically somebody tagged me into a video post yesterday on X, which was slightly alarming when I first looked at it, but got increasingly more alarming the deeper down the bunny hole that I went. So let's just play, first of all, a section of the video that was on X, and this is Tim Ballard speaking.
We just crossed, I think this is our 177th border crossing in the last 48 hours. The way we infilled was not traditional, but very much deliberate. We basically leveraged several different partnerships, but look, you don't know who is who anywhere, especially when you enter Syria. Once we got in, it was mission accomplished. We got to see everything. We saw all the people we wanted to see. We got the evidence we needed. This evidence is going to be valuable because it's the thing that triggers the clause in the agreement between Syria, U.S., and Jordan that allows the United States to come in and secure the corridor. So that was very key to get that evidence, but really it was to see the kids, see the people, bring hope to them, let them know that people do love them. They feel very unloved, and I don't blame them because nobody in the entire world of billions of people has done much of anything. It's just crazy.
So that's the introduction to Tim Ballard that I had yesterday, and then I started to look into it. So first of all, from a political perspective, we've spoken many times. This is an article in Haaretz, fairly recent one, that Israel was basically weaponizing the conflict that grew out of Jolani's attacks through the tribal forces on the communities of Suwayda in southern Syria that led to some appalling massacres. Israel seeks humanitarian corridor of influence in Syria, threatening regime stability. Regime, of course, is now the Al-Qaeda regime put in power by the British, Israel, Turkey, and the US. This is just quickly to show people the map. So the yellow arrow at the bottom, going from the occupied Golan territory, which is Syrian territory, of course, being gifted to Israel by President Trump, shows how the humanitarian corridor that Israel wants to create will cross through Dada in the south and into Suwayda, and then join with what is known as the David Corridor, which will give Israel access up the eastern border with Iraq and Jordan and Syria, and join up with the Kurdish separatist factions in the northeast. So that's the political aspect of what Tim Ballard is doing, and that's what I was first focused on. And here he is in the same video, basically confirming that he's working for Israel. So if we just run this.
But it was mission accomplished, and now we got to get to Jerusalem to get the information to the right government officials to go to the next phase, which is establish a corridor, get provisions, and continue to liberate and restore.
So very clear confirmation there that he is working for the Israeli regime in securing their assets in southern Syria. Then I started to look into who is Tim Ballard, and this came up as the Tim Ballard Foundation, which is where the alarm bells started to sound very loudly. As you can see there, he's a vigilante focusing on ending child trafficking. Now, as soon as I see that, generally speaking, particularly in American NGOs or UK government-backed NGOs, I immediately start to get highly suspicious that rather than preventing child trafficking, they might actually have a hand in facilitating it. Very close to President Trump. This was back in 2019. He was brought into Trump's administration to help Trump argue for a border wall in the south with Mexico, on the basis, of course, that it will halt sex trafficking. He's from Utah. That's why Tim Ballard on Trump's right there is with him and is very, very close to Trump even now, which, of course, immediately also made me start thinking of the Epstein files and Trump's refusal to release information, because it's very difficult to avoid that kind of connection when we're looking at someone who's dealing as a vigilante with the extraction of children from child trafficking rings, allegedly. Then let's have a look at this is an interview that he did very recently in the last few days with a Christian Zionist outfit called Media Line. The headline there says it all: Tim Ballard sacrifices all to save Syrian children. Again, alarm bells are going off. And I just took out the main details from the article on Tim Ballard, which again are not going to be very reassuring. Over a decade as a special agent for the Department of Homeland Security, close friends, as he says in the article, with President Trump, working with the Israeli regime to access Suwayda, as we've just mentioned, promoting the Abraham Accords, which of course is normalization with the Gulf Arab states, with Israel, and he's pushing Syria towards such a normalization. He was in Iraq 2017 to 19. He allegedly evacuated 10,000 Yazidis and Christians to Australia. He was also involved in Haiti. He adopted 2 children himself, which according to Against Child Trafficking is nothing more than legalized trafficking. If you're actually going to adopt a child from its indigenous country and bring it outside of that country to another culture. And currently he's pivoting towards Latin America, of course, as Trump is ramping up propaganda, particularly against Venezuela. Again, then I started to go further. This was an article in the New York Times in October 2024. To the world, he's an anti-trafficking hero. Women tell a different story. So what is this all about? Effectively, 6 women have brought cases of aggravated abuse and assault against them, sexual abuse. If we actually look at one of the examples in the article itself, and then I'll cover several more. In interviews and legal papers, the women described similar scenarios. Mr. Ballard recruited them to act as his romantic partner in undercover operations in which they would pose as wealthy sex tourists, a tactic he referred to as a couple's ruse. It had 2 purposes, he told them. It provided an easy excuse to avoid having sexual contact with the sex workers, and some people might be more open to confiding in a woman. Apparently, the role play went beyond the actual operation. What he would say is that as they're constantly under surveillance by the trafficking gangs, he would have to prove to them that he had a sexual relationship with the women that he had trapped into, as they believed, helping children. So he would sexually assault them in the car or in the hotel room, in the office, and so on. He was also reported as having handed over money to sex traffickers to procure underage teenagers for sex, which, as someone said, that's tantamount to creating a market for the very thing that he's ostensibly trying to prevent. He created, or he was the subject of a film called The Sound of Freedom. The executive producer on that, Paul Hutchison, was actually filmed, for want of a better word, groping an underage teenager on film. Ballard excused that behavior by saying that he had invested heavily in Ballard's operations. Hutchinson himself has now started a child liberation foundation, again, to rescue children from sex trafficking. So I just want to play this section of his latest interview, Ballard's latest interview with Media Line, where he protests the cases against him.
Before, so it's all going to come out. You know, it's funny that when I won in court in Utah, the media in Utah, who's owned and controlled by the very people who are trying to keep me looking bad, because if I'm guilty, if I'm innocent, they're guilty, right? And so they'll do anything. So I literally win in court, and they spin and lie to make me look like the bad guy. Like, it's unbelievable. Don't trust any news outlet, right? None of them are Matthew 18 compliant.
Matthew 18 compliant. I mean, I have to say he is an out-and-out Christian Zionist. That is very clear from many of his interviews and statements in the media. The fact is that the case was not actually withdrawn. This was only one of the lawsuits filed against Operation Underground Railroad, which was his original organization. He's actually been sacked, according to Operation Underground Railroad, that is now known as Our Rescue. He claims that he left on the basis of claims of sexual abuse and so on. But effectively, it was dismissed, not because of the merits of the case were lacking, but he said the case must be dismissed. Sorry, could I just have that back on? It was dismissed because of the way evidence against Ballard was obtained. Celeste Boris, one of the women bringing the case against Ballard, accused him of grooming and sexually assaulting her when they were supposed to be on operations to save children from human trafficking. And for evidence, she downloaded more than 90 documents from Ballard's email. Boris worked under Ballard as his executive assistant, including after he was accused of sexual misconduct and permanently separated from OUR. As I said, I've only just started really in the last 24 hours to go down this really rather sinister and sordid bunny hole. But the fact that this guy is now in southern Syria actively involved with the so-called rescue of children, I find extremely disturbing.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that report. The key bit is that truth is coming up to the surface, and its exposure, which is the first thing which has to happen in order to deal with these horrible things happening. So thank you for all your effort in keeping tabs on what's happening there. Now, we're coming towards the end of today's UK